The night was silent in Maple Oak Residency. Too silent. The tall oak trees along the street swayed in the cold wind, shadows stretching across the empty road like black fingers. At exactly 2:17 a.m., my German shepherd, Tiger, woke me up with a growl. He was staring at the gate, teeth bared, as if someone or something was standing outside. I slipped on my slippers, heart pounding. From my bedroom window, I saw a shadow move near the bushes, a tall figure standing completely still, watching. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished into the night. The next morning, before I could even make sense of what I saw, a letter arrived on my doorstep, stamped with the seal of the HOA Municipal Board. Your house is in violation of community rules. Prepare for legal action. I froze, because I knew exactly who was behind it. Margaret Collins, the woman who had already tried to destroy my reputation once, and this time she was coming for everything. But what she didn't know was that this battle would end her reign of fear forever.
Before we continue this mystery, let me ask you, where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. And if you love suspense and HOA drama stories, make sure you like this video and subscribe so you never miss the next twist. Because trust me, what's coming next will shock you.
My name is David Miller. I spent most of my life as a school teacher, known for being strict but fair. After 30 years of teaching in crowded classrooms filled with chalk dust and the sound of young voices, I retired. People always said I had lived by my rules, never bending them, never letting anyone cross the line. It made me respected, but it also made me a man who carried discipline like armor. Now, retirement had given me time to breathe, to live quietly, to focus on my family. My wife Laura worked as an international air hostess. She was beautiful, graceful, with long blonde hair and a warm smile. But her job kept her away from home most of the year. The airports and skies belonged to her more than our living room ever did. That left me as the steady presence for our two children. Ethan, 13, tall and thin, always dressed neatly in jeans and sneakers, had short brown hair that often fell into his thoughtful eyes. He dreamed of becoming a pilot, just like his mother worked around airplanes. Emma, 12, full of curiosity, always carried a diary tucked under her arm. She had long brown hair, a slightly freckled nose, and a laugh that filled the house with brightness. She wanted to become a writer and often wrote about everything that happened around her. We also had Martha, our servant. She wasn't just help in the house, she was family. Martha was short and plump with round cheeks and big expressive eyes. Her clothes were always mismatched and colorful, sometimes polka dots with stripes, but she wore them with confidence. She had a loud laugh that echoed in the halls, and a sharp tongue that could cut through tension. Honest to the bone, she loved the children like her own, but she also teased me endlessly about my strict ways. Whenever things became too heavy, Martha's jokes were like sudden sunlight. And then there was Tiger, our German shepherd. Strong, black-coated, and loyal, he was the silent protector of the Miller family. He had intelligent eyes that seemed to understand conversations. At night, his presence outside the children's rooms made me sleep easier. He wasn't just a pet, he was a guardian.
Our neighborhood, Maple Oak Residency, looked peaceful from the outside. Neat gardens stretched in front of tidy houses, fences painted in fresh colors, expensive cars parked in clean driveways. Children rode bicycles on weekends while couples walked hand in hand down the quiet lanes. My closest neighbors were three good families. Mr. and Mrs. Harris, retired government officers, both had silver hair and soft voices. Their house smelled of old books and roses, and they often invited my children for cookies and stories. Richard, a young banker who always wore perfectly polished shoes, drove a silver Honda Civic and had a habit of checking his wristwatch every 5 minutes, as though time itself owed him something. And then there was Natalie, newly married, always in pastel-colored dresses, her golden hair tied in ribbons, carrying baked cookies or pies to welcome anyone who knocked. She had a kindness about her that made everyone smile. But not every neighbor brought comfort. There was one whose shadow hung over the society like a storm cloud. Her name was Margaret Collins. She lived in house number 9, a 2-story brick home with black curtains always drawn as though sunlight wasn't welcome inside. Margaret was tall and thin, with sharp cheekbones, piercing green eyes, and lips that almost never curved into a smile. She walked with authority, her heels clicking like a judge's gavel. She never married, and the bitterness of that choice, or perhaps the consequence of it, showed in her every word and gesture. She carried power in the neighborhood, serving as a member of the HOA municipal board, and she used it like a weapon. Small issues became scandals under her hand. Children playing too loudly, garden hedges trimmed an inch higher than the rule book, a car parked slightly off the curb. Margaret made mountains out of molehills. Most people feared her. They whispered about her temper, about how she could ruin reputations with a few words, about how she turned friends into enemies with a single post on social media. Families avoided her, not daring to confront her. But Margaret despised something more than rules being broken. She despised happiness. Every married couple, every smiling child, every peaceful home seemed to offend her. And when she looked at me, raising my children with love despite my wife's long absences, her jealousy turned into a weapon sharpened just for me. It started with whispers. A photograph of me sitting in the garden with Martha, drinking tea, appeared on the neighborhood Facebook group. The caption suggested there was something improper between me and my servant. I ignored it at first, but the whispers grew. Some neighbors stopped greeting me when I walked past. At the local church, I felt eyes following me, conversations pausing when I entered. Margaret's poison was spreading silently, like smoke slipping through cracks.
Then came the official letter, a notice from the HOA citing potential violations of community rules regarding the renovation of my front porch. I hadn't renovated anything. The porch had been the same since we moved in. It was clear Margaret Collins was preparing for a battle. But Margaret made one mistake. She thought I would bend the way others had bent before her. She thought intimidation and shame would silence me. She didn't know that my years as a teacher, living by rules and standing firm, had prepared me for exactly this kind of fight. For the first time in her life, Margaret Collins had chosen the wrong man.
One evening, as the sky turned golden and the children played outside, a white envelope slipped under my gate. Tiger barked fiercely until I picked it up. It was another notice from the HOA. This time, the letter claimed my house extension violated municipal codes. The words were cold, threatening fines and even legal action if I didn't correct the so-called violation. I stood in the front yard, the paper trembling in my hand. Martha peeked over my shoulder, her hair tied in a loose bun, flowers still on her apron from baking bread. "What nonsense is this?" she muttered. "Your porch? Violation? I seen more crimes in the way Mrs. Collins dyes her hair." I couldn't help but chuckle, despite the weight pressing on my chest. Martha always had a way of breaking tension. Later that night, Ethan came to me, his eyes wide with worry. "Dad, kids at school said their parents saw things online about us. Is it true? They said people think Martha is—" His voice cracked. I put a hand on his shoulder. "Son, listen to me. Lies can travel faster than truth, but in the end, truth stands taller. Do you trust me?" He nodded. "Always." Emma, listening from the hallway, added softly, "Then we fight back." It wasn't just talk. Within days, Margaret escalated. Anonymous posts appeared on social media, my name dragged through the mud, my character questioned. Fake stories about me taking bribes as a teacher surfaced, stories about late-night visitors at my house, even rumors that Laura and I were separated. The lies spread like wildfire, whispered behind closed doors and shared in group chats. Martha stomped into the living room one afternoon, holding her phone high. "Look at this. Someone just posted that you stole library books from the school. I mean, really, if you're going to make up lies, at least make them interesting. Why not say you robbed a bank and flew off in a helicopter?" She rolled her eyes, but I could see anger burning in her.
Meanwhile, the good neighbors began showing where they stood. The Harrises came over with a basket of cookies, their silver hair shining in the porch light. "David, we've lived beside you for years," Mrs. Harris said gently. "Don't let her shake you. People talk, but we know your character." Richard, the young banker, visited too. His polished shoes clicked on the tiles. "Ignore the noise, Mr. Miller. Margaret thrives on fear. The moment you fight back, her power begins to crack." And Natalie, with her pastel dress and kind smile, arrived carrying a pie. "You're not alone. We're all tired of her games." Their words gave me strength, but Margaret wasn't done. She wanted more than whispers. She wanted destruction. A week later, 2 municipal officers knocked on my door. They wore crisp uniforms and carried official papers. "We've received complaints," one said flatly. "Your property extension violates HOA regulations. We'll have to issue a demolition order unless it's corrected." I stared at them in disbelief. "What extension? This porch has stood the same for 15 years." They shrugged as if they didn't care. Margaret had planted her seeds, and now the system moved in her favor. The order came through days later. I was to dismantle the very porch my children had grown up playing on, the porch where Laura and I had shared morning coffee whenever she was home. It felt like tearing down a part of our life. But just when despair threatened to break me, help arrived. Through an old colleague, I was introduced to Jonathan Pierce, a lawyer with sharp features, silver hair combed back neatly, and a reputation for winning impossible cases. He walked into my living room with a leather briefcase and an air of confidence that filled the room. "David," he said firmly, shaking my hand, "I've read the documents. This is a witch hunt, plain and simple. Margaret Collins has overstepped. We'll take this to court, and we'll win." For the first time in weeks, hope flickered. The courtroom was large, with wooden benches polished from years of use. The judge sat high, his face stern, eyes watching every move. Margaret stood at the other side, dressed in a dark green suit, her lips pressed in a thin, victorious line. She had come prepared, carrying binders full of supposed evidence. I sat behind Jonathan, my children beside me, Martha whispering nervous jokes under her breath. "Don't worry, if it goes badly, I'll distract them by dancing on the table." Ethan snorted, and even Emma smiled faintly. Jonathan rose to speak. His voice was calm but sharp. "Your Honor, this case isn't about a porch. It's about a personal vendetta. My client has lived in Maple Oak Residency for years, respected, law-abiding, raising 2 children with integrity. The so-called violations are fabricated, driven by the malice of one individual who abuses her authority." Margaret's lawyers shot back, presenting photos, documents, even forged complaints. But Jonathan dismantled each one with precision, exposing inconsistencies, exposing lies, and reminding the court of proper municipal procedures. At one point, Margaret herself stood to testify, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Your Honor, this man has always been a troublemaker. Just ask anyone. His house, his family, even his servant, they disturb the peace of our community." Jonathan leaned forward. "And yet, Mrs. Collins,
Every official inspection of his property for the past decade has cleared him. Isn't it true you filed more complaints against Mr. Miller than the entire neighborhood combined?" The courtroom chuckled. The judge silenced them with a glare, but I saw a crack in Margaret's armor. After hours of arguments, the judge leaned back. Silence filled the room. Then he spoke. "This court finds insufficient evidence of any violation. The demolition order is overruled. Case dismissed." Relief washed over me. Martha let out a loud, "Ha! Take that, witch!" earning a warning glance from the judge. Ethan hugged me. Emma whispered, "I knew we'd win." But for Margaret, it was the first taste of defeat, and it would not be her last. The search of my home had left the air heavy with unease, but Margaret was not finished. In fact, she thrived on the spectacle, telling anyone who would listen that justice had only begun and that next time the evidence will be found. Her sharp voice carried across the neighborhood whenever she spoke on her porch, as though she wanted every leaf and bird to hear her pronouncements. At the community center a week later, she stood before the HOA meeting, dressed in her usual power suit, navy blue with shoulder pads that made her look like she was preparing for battle. Her silver hair was coiled in a bun so tight it seemed to pull her face into a permanent scowl. Her voice rose over the murmurs of the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen of Maple Oak Residency, are we going to stand by while immoral, dangerous behavior tarnishes the reputation of our community? A man who hides behind books and roses, a so-called retired teacher, defying every rule we stand for?" I sat in the audience, Ethan and Emma on either side of me. Richard and Natalie exchanged worried glances nearby. Martha crossed her arms, muttering, "She makes it sound like you're running a mafia empire instead of teaching algebra." The room was divided. Some neighbors, intimidated by Margaret's confidence, nodded hesitantly. Others shifted uncomfortably, not daring to oppose her outright. I stood, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "You've searched my house, invaded my family's peace, dragged my children's names through the mud, and yet nothing. No crime, no rule broken, only your malice." Gasps filled the hall. Margaret's face turned crimson, but before she could retort, Martha piped up loudly from the back. "If gossip were a crime, Margaret, you'd be serving a life sentence already." Laughter broke out, some hesitant, some bold. Her glare could have burned holes in the walls. But she wasn't laughing when, days later, I was served with notice of a new lawsuit. She had taken the matter to a higher court, this time accusing me of fraud in the construction of my home itself. She claimed the permits were forged, that my property was in violation of municipal codes. It was absurd, but dangerous. If the court believed her, my house could be demolished.
The courtroom was larger this time, more imposing, with high ceilings and dark wooden benches polished smooth by decades of cases. The smell of old paper and coffee hung in the air. I sat with my advocate, Mr. Harris, a sharp-minded lawyer with a calm demeanor and a reassuring presence. Ethan and Emma were excused from attending, but Laura, home from a flight schedule change, sat behind me, her flight attendant's grace softened by deep worry. Margaret entered dramatically, escorted by her own expensive attorney, a tall man with slicked-back hair and a voice like velvet. She wore a crimson suit this time, her lips painted to match, as if dressed for victory. The case began. Her lawyer spoke with flourish about protecting the integrity of Maple Oak Residency, about a man who believed himself above the law. He waved documents, photos, charts, each one twisting reality into a weapon. When it was our turn, Mr. Harris rose. His voice was calm but powerful, like water carving stone. He presented real permits, verified signatures, city inspection records. He cross-examined Margaret's so-called witnesses until their statements crumbled under scrutiny. But the most dramatic moment came when Martha was called as a character witness. She marched up to the stand, a bright yellow dress making her impossible to ignore. Her testimony was a mix of heartfelt loyalty and unintended comedy. Mr. Miller, he's as honest as they come. Boringly honest, if you ask me. The man argues with cashiers if they give him an extra penny by mistake. And fraud? Please, he can't even lie about liking my experimental spinach casserole. The courtroom chuckled. Even the judge's lips twitched. Margaret fumed silently, her knuckles white as she gripped the table. The tension reached its peak when the judge leaned forward, eyes stern, and announced that after reviewing all evidence, the accusations had no basis. The case was dismissed. Margaret's lawyer sagged in defeat. Margaret herself stood frozen, her mouth slightly open as though she had forgotten how to speak. The room seemed to exhale collectively. For the second time, she had lost. But what shook the society even more was what followed outside the courthouse. Neighbors who had once whispered in fear now began to talk openly. Richard clapped me on the back, saying, "That woman's reign is ending." Natalie, with rare boldness, told a small group of residents, "We don't have to be afraid anymore." Margaret, overhearing, spun on her heel and hissed, "You'll regret turning against me." But the threat sounded weaker than before, stripped of its old power. That evening, as I sat in the garden with Laura, the children, and Martha, Tiger curled at our feet, I felt the winds of change. The oak trees swayed gently, the lawn glowing under the golden sunset. Laughter bubbled between us as Martha retold her courtroom performance, exaggerating her bravery until Ethan nearly choked on his lemonade. Yet, deep inside, I knew it wasn't over. Margaret was not a woman to surrender easily. If anything, her humiliation would only push her to strike harder. And I was right. Within weeks, she launched her final, most desperate campaign, one that would shake not just me, but the entire community to its core.
The weeks after Margaret's second defeat were some of the strangest the neighborhood had ever seen. It was as though a spell had been broken, and people who had once avoided even whispering about her now spoke more freely. At first, it was quiet murmurs, neighbors in hushed tones at the community park, or small groups at the cafe near the society gates. But soon, confidence grew, and her name was no longer spoken with fear, but with disdain, or even pity. Margaret, however, refused to fade quietly. She doubled her efforts, storming into meetings, filing new complaints, and sending long, venomous emails to the HOA board. Her words grew sharper, her accusations wilder. She claimed the community funds were being misused, that families were hiding illegal tenants, that lawns were being watered at forbidden hours. Nothing was too trivial for her crusade. But every time she raised an alarm, she was met with rolling eyes, dismissive laughter, or pointed silence. The tide had turned. Still, she saved her fiercest wrath from me. My roses were inspected weekly by her, my driveway photographed, my children watched as they rode their bikes. She claimed Tiger, my loyal German shepherd, was a dangerous beast and demanded he be removed from the society. It was relentless. One evening, Richard, Natalie, and Martha gathered at my house. Laura was home between flights, sitting on the sofa in her navy blue uniform, her hair tied back neatly. Ethan and Emma sprawled on the rug with Tiger, who lazily rolled onto his back, demanding belly rubs. The room smelled of Martha's freshly baked apple pie, which she had proudly delivered on a gaudy floral plate. Richard leaned back in his chair, his salt and pepper beard patching the lamplight. "She's not going to stop until she destroys herself," he said grimly.
She's already destroyed half the joy in this place, Natalie added, her voice sharp. We tiptoe around like children every time she walks by.
Martha waved her fork dramatically. Well, maybe if she tried some pie, she'd sweeten up, though she'd probably accuse me of poisoning it. We laughed, but Laura's smile was tired. She reached over, taking my hand gently. How much more of this can we take? The children, you, us. I didn't answer right away. Outside, the tall street lamps cast long shadows across the garden, the rose bushes swaying in the breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the faint sound of crickets filled the silence. The answer came days later, not from me, but from Margaret herself. One stormy afternoon, as rain battered against the windows and the wind howled through the trees, a new scandal erupted. Margaret had called a press conference, yes, an actual press conference, outside the gates of Maple Oak Residency. Dressed in a tailored black coat and wide-brimmed hat, she stood before a small group of local reporters declaring that corruption and immorality had taken root in the society. She named me directly, calling me a fraud, a manipulator, and unfit to raise children. It was her boldest attack yet, but it was also her undoing. For in her fury, Margaret had gone too far. The very reporters she invited began asking uncomfortable questions, not to me, but to her. They investigated her past, her record as an HOA board member, her dealings with municipal offices, and what they uncovered stunned everyone. Margaret had spent years bending rules for her own benefit. She had bypassed regulations for her property, bullied contractors, and even siphoned community funds for her endless legal battles. Her spotless image crumbled overnight.
The society was shaken. Residents who once cowered before her gathered in angry groups, demanding explanations. The HOA called an emergency meeting, where Margaret was confronted openly for the first time. Voices rose, fingers pointed, and Margaret, once the untouchable queen of the neighborhood, found herself cornered. I was present at that meeting, seated quietly in the back with Laura and my neighbors. Margaret's face was pale, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. The accusations rained down. You lied to us! You wasted our money! You made us afraid in our own homes. For the first time in years, Margaret was speechless. The climax came when the HOA president, a usually timid man named George, stood up and declared firmly, "Margaret, you are hereby stripped of your position on the board, effective immediately." The room erupted in gasps, then applause. Margaret's lips trembled as she tried to protest, but her voice cracked. She looked smaller than ever, her red power suits and sharp words stripped of meaning.
After that night, Margaret vanished from public view. Curtains drawn, car unmoved, house silent. The woman who had terrorized the community for decades had become a ghost within it. But fate wasn't finished with her. Weeks later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting was shaky, the paper scented faintly of lavender. It was from Margaret. "Mr. Miller," it began, "for years I believed myself strong when I was cruel, respected when I was feared. But I see now that I was only alone. I fought against you not because you wronged me, but because you reminded me of what I never had: family, love, laughter. I cannot live in this house, in this society, surrounded by the echoes of my own bitterness. I have chosen to leave. By the time you read this, I will have gone." She ended the letter with a sentence that stunned me. "I am sorry." True to her words, Margaret sold her home quietly and moved to an old age residence outside the city. No grand speeches, no drama, just silence.
The society exhaled. Life bloomed again. Children played freely on the streets. Neighbors visited one another without fear. Laughter returned to gardens and parks. And for the first time in years, the air felt light. That spring, as roses burst into full bloom in my garden, I hosted a small gathering. Richard and Natalie brought wine. Martha carried a plate of yet another casserole. Laura returned home with stories from the skies, and Ethan and Emma ran around with Tiger, who chased a frisbee clumsily across the lawn. The evening sun painted the sky in streaks of pink and gold, and the sound of laughter drifted through the neighborhood. As I sat back in my chair, surrounded by family, friends, and peace, I realized the truth. Evil does not last forever. Fear is powerful, but so is unity. And sometimes standing firm, quietly, steadily, without malice, is the most powerful act of all. And for those listening now, watching the rise and fall of Margaret from wherever you are, I ask you, where are you watching from? Comment below. Subscribe so you can join me again for more stories that remind us that even in the darkest corners of our neighborhoods, light can still break through.